Welcome to the HR Dialogues, a show where we talk about HR and the future of work. I'm your host, Dr. Dieter Veldsman, and today we'll be talking about a topic that most HR leaders have struggled with in their careers before, and that is how to enter the boardroom, hold the gravitas and the presence required to really step into the C-suite. Welcome to the HR Dialogues, where we learn from people practitioners as they navigate the emerging world of work. Today, I'm joined by Candice Mitchell. Candice, welcome to the HR Dialogues.
Thank you so much for having me. I have interacted with your audience before and absolutely loved it. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise. And Candice, what makes you passionate about HR as a field and as a profession? What makes your eyes light up?
Oh, so much, Dieter. I'm one of those weirdos, if I can say, that actually chose this profession from the beginning. So after high school, I took a 2-year gap year, and then all I knew, or 2-year gap years, and all I knew is that I needed to work with people. So I went back home to South Africa and I studied organizational psychology, not really knowing what that was. And during my honors year, so which is your 4th year kind of postgraduate degree, a lecturer came in and told us what she did, which was learning and development. And I honestly sat there thinking, people get paid for this? I was like, whoa. And in that moment, and I still to this day, I wish I remembered her, because I would reach out and just like, she literally shaped my entire life in that 10-minute presentation. And I chose it. And that is what I've been doing ever since, 20 years later.
Absolutely love it. And I mean, if ever anybody wanted a bit of a validation that it matters to go and speak to students, I think you've definitely just provided that. Candice, what do you do as a day job? You've spoken about the fact long, extensive career in learning and development. You're in the US at the moment, but what do you do day to day?
Yeah. Day to day, I run my own business. I have 2 sides of that business. I consult with corporate clients, really working with the C-suite, putting together their strategic capability plans. And then I often work alongside an L&D team to bring it to life, the implementation of that strategic plan. And then the other side is I run the Talent Development Academy, which is a high-level academy for learning and development leaders.
Absolutely love it. And if I'm not mistaken, your book is there in the background that you have recently released. Can you tell us what the book is about?
Yes, absolutely. My pride and joy. And honestly, I can't believe people are reading it, but people are reading it and actually genuinely loving it. Like, people are reaching out saying, I've made them cry, I've made them laugh. And so it has been so rewarding. And I actually got I'm an instant USA Today best-selling author, which is,
congrats.
Less than 1% of authors get that. So I'm really proud. The book is called Choose You: For the People Who Refuse to Disappear. And there are 3 parts to the book. The first part is where we get lost. The second part is how we show up because of that, because of some invisibility. Some people overcompensate, some people fade into the background. I've created 6 work archetypes that you will know the people when you read the book for sure. And then the third part is how we step back into our full selves, which I take them through. So 5 steps. I call it the 5 pillars of agency. So that's the book. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, massive congratulations. And today's topic is one that also, I think, hits pretty close to home for me as well when we start thinking about, showing up, executive presence, and very often HR and L&D leaders. We know we need to do these types of things, but I can still remember now one of my first excos I stepped into, the 3-piece suit was on. I was so nervous. I didn't know how to carry myself. So Candice, let's talk about executive presence and how we can actually think and help HR and L&D leaders to build that throughout the course of their careers. But let's start with a question. When I say executive presence, what comes to mind for you?
It's stepping in knowing that you're the expert in what you do. You're not the expert in, you're walking into a C-suite boardroom. You are not the expert in, and whatever your industry is, right? You're not the expert in engineering. You're not the expert in packaging. You're not the expert in accounting. You are the expert in leading people, and for me specifically, developing people. And you need to own that. And Ditsa, what I find honestly, is we are very intelligent. Like everyone I work with has, you're a doctor, PhDs, master's degrees, all of the letters behind our names. And we kind of walk in with that, but it's just owning it. We don't need to tell them what we know. We need to position ourselves as the expert and just own that. I always say, pull up your own damn chair. No one's going to, make that space for you. So yeah. And we can get more into it.
No, definitely. I think you also, hit the nail on the head. And advice that a CEO gave me earlier in my career was to say, never forget the voice that you represent around the table, and stop trying to impersonate one of the other voices, because you're never going to be as good as the CFO in the finance stuff or as the CIO in the IT stuff. I think your earlier point around business advice, however, is crucially important. If you understand the business and what we do, and you speak about, my expertise in whether that's HR or L&D or people development, I think that does change the equation a little bit. But I'd love to hear from you. Where do you think people get stuck, and why do we struggle as HR and L&D professionals to have the confidence to kind of show up in that way?
I think it's historic, right? We have been, and since the industrial era, we have been the support function, the training people, the tick box people. And it's like, we just can't shake it. And the people I coach really do walk into the room wanting to show why learning is important. Like, why is HR important? Why does this matter? But we need a complete switch. And here I'm going to be a little bit controversial, but learning doesn't matter unless you're helping the business move forward. And that's the reframe. Like, learning for the sake of learning is pointless. It really is. Yes, you can feel better about yourself, of course, but for the business leaders, when you're coming in saying we taught these many people, we did our leadership training, they're like, okay, cool. What is the point?
Yeah, I want to call out the point that you make, because I think you're absolutely right. There's certain, can I say, associations that people still make with the HR and L&D role. And that goes beyond the individual leader. I think it goes very much towards the roots that we had in the past and the value that we added, which was valuable, but it was different than what it is today. So I often think, you show up for the strategic conversation and people are like, but why are you talking about this? This is not necessarily, in your particular role. The second thing you call out, which I think is crucially important, is you need to be confident in your own contribution. I sometimes find, and I fell into that trap myself, you try to justify your existence by showing how much you know, as opposed to being confident about the fact that the things that I contribute does add value to the business. And I think there's always going to be dynamics that you are either not prepared for or that you were not aware of even, that starts to play into. And it's not about you. Sometimes I find people walk out of those meeting rooms and they're like, oh my word, that was absolutely terrible. And we're like, what do you mean it was terrible? You actually did really, really well.
Yes, exactly.
Candice, you alluded to the fact that there's a way of approaching this differently. Before we jump in there, I want to kind of focus on the flip side of that. What does it look like when executive presence is not there? Can you make us think and feel through what it looks like?
Oh, yeah, you actually, even that question makes my stomach flip, because it's a horrible place to be. I've definitely been there. Again, luckily, I was put in front of the C-suite very early in my career. So I've had a lot of failure and a lot of learning. So I can go back to one of my earlier days where I came in and I prepared 4 weeks. I prepared for this meeting, right? To me, it was so good. I was like, wow, pat on the back, Candice, you nailed this. It was like an 8-page Word document. It was called the learning brief. And I go in and they were kind of just looking at me, like not really understanding what was happening. And I know why, because I was so learning centric. I didn't get to know them at all. I didn't know their business at all. And yet I was coming with a solution. And they were like, but you don't even know the problem. They didn't say that to me at the time. They were gracious enough to let me fail, I suppose, fully in
Yeah.
total. They didn't interrupt me or stop me. And I came with these beautiful learning outcomes and the solution and everything like that. And that is the order taker mode and the not
Yeah.
executive presence mode, because you're coming,
Mm.
yes, you are the expert in learning, but you need to be business aligned. So you cannot lead with a solution.
And I was about to say, and it's counterintuitive, right? You almost get taught around the fact that you need to think and be solution focused and oriented, whereas very often at that level, it pays to listen first, to build up the trust capital first. That was been my experience over the years, that very often it's much less about what happens in the moment and a lot more about what's happened before in terms of taking the time to understand the business, taking the time to build some of that relationship and allyship that you almost require to really be able to have an impact at that level, whether you are a permanent member of the executive team or whether you're stepping into that over time. And then I think on the other side, to your point, very often it's not about going there, or a mistake that I sometimes see people make is, let's say I go to an exco meeting. I don't really know what I want out of it. Do I just want input? Do I want sign off? Do I want people to try to poke holes in potentially what I'm bringing and putting on the table? And I think if you're not clear about that, an executive meeting tends to derail a little bit. And I think that influences the credibility and the influence that you will actually have
Mm-hmm.
as part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's flip it. What does it look like when it works?
I actually have a 5-step model that I put into place. So the first thing is actually understanding the macro environment. So what is
Mm-hmm.
happening out there in the world that we need to be aware of, right? Like political turmoil, AI disruption, globalization as the norm, hybrid workplaces, things that are just real for everyone. And we're not working in a bubble, we're working in the world. So what are those influences that we need to be aware of? Then I take a step down and I say, okay, so what is out of those things, and maybe not even, but industry specific. So one of my main clients right now, they're in the financial services world. We've got to understand that there are way less CAs coming out of university or college every year. Many tens of thousands less every year. So the pool is getting smaller. They've got competition with the other firms, right? And so how do we attract top talent in this environment, right? Like how do we attract them and how do we keep them? Then I look at the people angle. So what do people want from work, right? They're wanting development. That is the top thing. They're wanting good salaries, of course. They're wanting an environment where they feel belonging, for example, and I'm just throwing things out there based on what I know in general.
Yeah, of course.
So then once that happens, then I get to the organization. Okay, what does the organization want, right? They're going through M&A, they're reducing their workforce, they want more efficiencies. Like what are their goals for the business? And then only do I think of, okay, so how can people capability support all of this, right? And it's hard. That's a lot of stuff to think through. That is a very strategic mindset of looking at that, deciphering it all, figuring out the company goals, and then coming to them, and not with the solution. I don't come to them with the solution at that time. So I will present all of this saying, this is your reality. Are you aware of this? We're going to lose good people if we don't develop them. It's literally the number one reason why people fail.
I love that. I mean, I can really resonate with a couple of things there, right? The one is, I've always myself tried to apply a little bit of a thinking framework that says, but do I know what I'm trying to solve for? And do I know in what context am I trying to solve for this? So it becomes less about this is the answer, but more about the answer in this context means something different. And then do I actually know what success looks like? Because for me, that's very often the piece that I find we don't speak to. We come in and we either say the solution, and then it's interesting for me, HR and L&D leaders then often define success in terms of HR and L&D outcomes, as opposed to necessarily defining it back in terms of the business problem that we are trying to solve and drawing that line. And then to your point, I think it does help to give that external view, depending now on the context within which you operate. I think it does help to give people the perspective that you've thought broader than, the silo within which you live in the organization, or if you're coming from outside, gives you a little bit of street cred, I think, to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So if I'm at the beginning of my HR career, how do I actually start building this as part and parcel of the skill set I have, what I do, and how do I practice that? So by the time that I get there and really need to use it in these situations, it becomes kind of second nature to me.
I love that so much. So I also have 3 things that I train more junior people on. So the first thing is get to know the business, like just get to know it, right? And that can be as simple as attending team meetings. It depends on your industry, right? Like if it's office bound, try and be a fly on the wall in the team meetings. If it's manufacturing, if you're out in the field, I mean, and I always talk about this. I spent sort of days, I supported truck drivers, like semi drivers. And I woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning to drive 3 hours to get there at 4 o'clock to get to the depot. So I could just see them loading their trucks, interacting with their team members, all of that stuff. And then they got to know me, and I'd show up, in my safety boots and my reflective vest, because then you're building up, like I think you said it, the trust capital. So getting to know the people is spending time with them, and getting to know the businesses, go through those company goals. What are the strategic things? Spend some time with leadership. They want you to help them, and they are so gracious. Not never. I've had some awful people, of course, but mostly, I'm going to say 98% of people know you want to help, and they're kind of rooting for you, right? Because they're one capable people.
I come out of the financial services industry, and it was the exact same thing, right? In terms of getting to know the business means spending time in the branch. You don't get to know the business from a desk sitting somewhere in the head office environment. And a similar example, I was doing some work for a media sport broadcaster at some point in time, did the same thing, got scheduled on, the general team that went out, lug the cables around, set up the cameras. Obviously, they didn't let me film. I mean, I think that's a little bit out of my skill set. But it did provide with the opportunity to actually see what the day-to-day reality looks like of individuals, which gave me a very different view and a different perspective. And I think knowing the business, taking it one step further, even when you go to executive type of forums, is actually knowing who you are speaking to and what they are responsible for and what they care about. That was one of the biggest lessons that I learned around the fact that you could have, the same presentation, just for argument's sake, but it's 5 different stories depending on who you are speaking to at that level, if you know what they care about and what their reality looks like. And I think it comes back to your point earlier around what is the industry that you are playing in and the macro environment, but also, do I know who I'm speaking to, and do I know what they care about? We had this one leader where in the financial services, in the bank, he was responsible for the entire branch network. And he always had this thing around his first question that he asked you: whatever you are bringing to me, is it good or bad for my people? Because if you can't tell me whether it's going to be good or bad for them, then you don't really understand what the impact is going to be. And that was the gateway to get a meeting with him, which in hindsight, I absolutely loved, because I think it taught you to think from his perspective, and kind of put yourself in his shoes for a little bit around how is he taking this to his people or guiding things. Candice, I want to bring it back, because I think you've made a valid point that often in HR and L&D, we get stuck a bit in the HR and L&D bubble, and we don't do it with bad intentions, but we forget that there's a business out there. And I think, I've spoken on the show very previously about it as well, that I think we develop careers in the wrong way, because we typically say, learn L&D or learn HR, learn your stakeholders. Oh, there's a business, go learn your business. And then we say, but you have to be strategic, go understand the impact, right? By that point in time, I think you've missed so many good opportunities. Candice, I want to flip the conversation one more time. And I want to ask you this question, because you alluded to it earlier on. Very often, HR and L&D professionals struggle with the perception that is already with them when they come into the room or when people meet them. Now, for some, and I mean, I ask this question a lot whenever we help clients. I ask the business, what does good HR and L&D look like? And then I ask the same question to the individuals, and it's very different answers there. How do I deal with, I'm moving into an organization, there's a perception that HR is still what it was in the 1930s and L&D is still only about classroom training. How do I actually change that? Because that will trip me up, whether that's my fault or not.
Yes. And here it's baby steps, honestly. I was having this conversation last week, and someone named Anita said, we can shout from the rooftops all day about not being order takers, but we need to train people to not be order givers. And I loved
Mhm.
that. I was like, brilliant, 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 brilliant. Because yes, this happens, and it happened to me, and it didn't end well for me because I had
Mm.
grown up in an environment where learning and development was like an absolute no-brainer. Like, I cannot believe that that's not the norm, because I started in that environment. I worked there for 10 years. And then when I started consulting, and I'm like, L&D is optional? What? Like, how? So yeah, it is the environment, and it's the maturity of the leaders. And I do say expect more. You have to expect more from your L&D. We don't just deliver training. We deliver and it's a 5-spoke thing that I can give to your people, but we deliver so much, right? We attract the right talent. We keep the right talent. We build the capability. We actually enhance morale. Like, we do all of these things, right?
Yeah, I think it's valuable to, and sometimes to your point, it is a bit of a process, but I think to also realize that inherently, whether it's good or bad, you are inheriting the history, right, of either L&D or HR, whether the previous person was very successful or not, whether they had a very different style than you. I think you're inheriting that. What is the most common mistake beyond what we've spoken about now that you still see experienced, HR and L&D leaders make, that has done a lot of these things, but still, yet when they look back, they have this sense and this feeling that they're not getting, and I'm going to call it out bluntly, the respect that they deserve at the level that they're at?
Waiting to be invited, waiting to have the title, waiting for that elusive chair. I mean, I can't tell you how much the chair doesn't matter. You've got to push yourself into that environment.
Yeah, and I think there's also, a little bit of courage there to sometimes stick your neck out and take the chance, right? If
Mhm.
it's something that you really want, and if it's something that you're passionate about, and I think importantly, if it's something that you really believe in, that it can make a difference, you have to drive, that agenda. So,
Mhm.
Candice, from my side, I think a couple of really good call outs that I want to make when we spoke about the fact that why do we sometimes struggle with presence as HR and L&D professionals? We spoke very much about the fact that very often we don't have the exposure, we don't have the confidence, we don't have the commercial or business acumen and mindset to actually be able to engage in the right way with the stakeholders that we're dealing with. Nobody else is going to do it for you. And it is really up to you to make sure that you build the career that you want and that you have the influence and can bring the solutions to the table at the
Mhm.
right point at the right time.
Mhm.
Candice, from my side, a very big thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom with us. Where can people follow you, grab a copy of your book, or reach out to you to kind of engage further?
Yes, absolutely. So of course, LinkedIn is the place. I'm also having some fun on Instagram, actually. So if anyone is on Instagram, I'm kind of just going all in and really just having fun with it, which has been quite cool. But who should contact me is any learning and development manager plus who's feeling stuck. Maybe you fell into L&D, maybe you don't know the
Mm.
commercial side. Those are the people I serve and support. And yeah, so those are the people who should contact me.
Candice, thank you so much for joining, and for everybody dialing into this episode of the HR Dialogues. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
We will see you soon, and make sure to follow and keep an eye out on our for our next episode. Bye
it's
bye.
been such fun. Bye.